All right, everybody. It is 6 o'clock here, and I see a lot of people coming on board. We had tons of RSVPs and a big rush here at the end. So hopefully you're logging on fine. We'll give people just a minute or so to. All right, everybody. It is 6 o'clock here to get on board. So for starters, we should have this is an interactive experience. Oh, hi, everybody. Okay, good. If you can hear me, type in the chat room there. Make sure you guys can hear me. Type yes, or yes, I can hear you, or anything to that effect. There we go. New York's in the house. There we go. El Cajon, Kansas. Whew. We got a lot of people here, so we have a great program for you today. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, we can hear me. Good. Soon you'll see me. You won't be as happy then, but all right, excellent. Tons of people coming on board. Okay, first, I want to welcome everybody. I'm going to turn on, let me see here. I'm going to turn on my camera here. Okay, and we'll do that. There we go. All right, so you should be able to see me now, unfortunately. Welcome. Thanks for being here. You're here, of course, because you are passionate about our rights, and we're experiencing. If you're not from California, we're experiencing something very interesting here in California. If you live in an equally blue state, you might be suffering under some of the same circumstances. First of all, my name is Tony Krvaric. I'm a small business owner here in San Diego. I'm also the chairman of the Republican Party of San Diego County, although this doesn't have to be, shouldn't be anything partisan. But before anybody outs me as the chairman of the Republican Party of San Diego County, I'm leading with that, of course. And so that's not a secret. The event and the program is nonpartisan and so forth. We're going to have a great time today. So I want to first, we'll also do interactive things. So we're going to first start with a poll. And so if you're looking at your window, in your browser window, all right, we almost have 400 people joined us. If you look in your browser window, if you're on your phone, I can't speak to it on the phone, but on the right-hand side, there's a tab, 3 little dots. If you're not seeing the chat window, then click on those 3 dots. It'll expand your window. And that's where we'll have some interactivity. For starters, we're going to do a little poll, and we'll do another couple polls through the thing. So I'm going to send a poll of a question that is on everybody's mind right now. It is a deep question that a lot of Americans are struggling with. So I'm going to send that poll into the field here, and then we will all see the results afterwards. So on your screen, you should see a poll. And this is the big question that everybody's struggling with. Have you watched Tiger King on Netflix? This is the lighthearted portion of the program, just to get us started and to see that the system works and everything. So have you watched Tiger King on Netflix? The options are absolutely, no, not yet, but I will, too overhyped, I refuse, what's Tiger King, and what's Netflix? So I'll leave that out there for a couple more seconds. It's not, but I just want to make sure I see the results coming in, and we have a lot of passionate people on here, and so it'll be exciting to see the intro. Okay, as they say in the legislature, all those who wish to vote, please vote. All those who wish to vote, please vote. And I am last chance to vote. I will turn off the poll. And so you should see the results of your poll. If you see the results, please type yes. If you see the results, just so I know that the system is working. There we go. Okay. Poll. So for those of you that aren't seeing it, absolutely 22%, not yet, but I will, 14%. Way too overhyped. I refuse to watch it. 33%. I think that's the winner. What's Tiger King? 25%. And then what's Netflix at 3%. So we're going to have to talk to you guys a little bit later. So, all right. Everything's working. I'm not going to take any more time here. I want to get to the meat of things. And so we're going to start with an introduction video about our speaker. And hopefully I will get this part to work. So stand by, and I will play a video. here that I will turn myself off. And let's see here.
Our next guest used to lead the California Republican Party, attorney Harmeet Dhillon, and she joins us now from San Francisco. Hey, Harmeet.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So what do you make of this?
Well, his lawsuit is interesting. I've actually sued the state 10 times over this same shutdown, but specifically his is about not the state's shutdown order, but the differences between Alameda County's shutdown, which is more restrictive in his view, and other counties. So there's a second facility that Tesla has in San Joaquin County, and they're allowed to operate. But Alameda County is saying after some negotiations, we're not going to let your factory open, and that is their main manufacturing facility in America. So obviously that's crippling to the 20,000 employees of Tesla in California. And so that's why he's threatening to move it all to Texas and maybe other places.
Will he go through with it?
I think he has a good reason to. And I think that you probably are going to see some movement, certainly out of Alameda County.
Yeah, it just cost him a lot to move, and a lot of people would lose their jobs in California unless they, he offered them to move with the company. But
right.
So many people might not do that. All right, so the county has a statement. They say, we appreciate that our residents and businesses have made tremendous sacrifices and that together we have been able to save lives and protect community health in our region. We need to continue to work together so those sacrifices don't go to waste. They're trying to say that they're staying safe. One of the councilwomen, or the assemblywoman, Lorena Gonzalez, did you see what she tweeted out? She basically said, good riddance. This is what she said. I can't even say it on air. But I thought, wow, is that warranted? He's just trying to make money and put food on the table.
Lorena Gonzalez, with a law she passed last year, has been responsible for the deaths of more jobs in California than any other member of our legislature. And she's from San Diego, so it's not really her backyard or her business. Very foul mouth on that lady. But look, if I'm a business owner, which I am, and I'm having my 20,000 person factory shut down in California, you better believe that I'm looking across the border to Nevada and other states that are beginning to open up, because those people, they may have jobs right now, but they can't work, and that's unsustainable for America's companies. So California really needs to wake up and start changing its policies and open up safely, but faster.
Yeah, Dan Crenshaw tweeted out, come on, come to Texas. Thanks so much, Harmeet. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Senator Michael.
There we go. All right, so we're going to turn that off, and we will go back on here to, there we go. Okay. There you go. Okay. Sorry about that. A lot of things moving. Oh, we're over 400 people. So hopefully that video went well. We kind of added that at the last minute. But at this point, I'd like to introduce Harmeet Dhillon. Harmeet Dhillon is a good friend. I've known her a long time, and you guys have seen her on Fox News. She is a warrior for freedom. She obviously serves on the California Republican Party as the RNC National Committee woman, but she's here in her capacity as CEO of Center for American Liberty, which used to be that the ACLU took on cases where our liberties were and our rights were infringed upon, but they have been nowhere to be seen lately. So with that, I will bring on Harmeet. If you can come on, Harmeet, and join us and turn on your video and your audio. There we go. And I think that's it. Let's see. And we can stop that. Can you hear us, Harmeet?
Yeah, I can hear you. Tony, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, and you look great. And so let's see in the chat window, can you guys see both Harmeet and me? And I'm on there. I'm going to minimize myself in just a minute. You're not here to watch me. But if you can just type in yes, that you're seeing both of us and you can hear both of us, that would be great. So, all right, perfect. Well, I will minimize myself because, let me see here. I'll be over here just in case. Oh, wow, everybody's on board. All right, Harmeet, thank you for being here. Give us a little, I gave just a little bit of an introduction, maybe give us a little bit of a self-introduction to everybody that's on here. We're almost pushing 500 attendees here. Thank you for taking the time to join us. You've been, unfortunately, very busy lately. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what's going on, your take on what's going on in California right now.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you, Tony, first of all, for your generosity in setting up this webinar. Both myself and the members of my legal team who are working around the clock on these cases, we've been inundated with requests, not just from people here in California who we know socially or even strangers who've seen us and our work, but also from people all over the United States. My team and I have fielded requests from Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, the far-flung corners of our American nation, as well as, of course, a huge amount of people in our 40 million person state here in California. And when I mention the team, I want to make sure that I'm letting everybody know who are the other people I work with regularly. So I think most of the folks who know you and I are probably familiar with Mark Moiser, who is a very strong lawyer who works at my firm with me and my team. Mark has really been a workhorse here together with me. We're both working kind of 18-hour days on this litigation and on research, counseling, trying to field questions, urgent issues, and sort of do triage and direct traffic for people, because this is a crisis of epic proportions for the civil rights of Americans. Of course, it's also a tragedy for people who are affected by this terrible virus. Luckily, that is not as bad as what was originally predicted. But the civil rights crisis is much worse than what anybody ever thought, even what I thought. And I'm pretty cynical about these issues. Also, Mark Trammell works with me. He's a young attorney. He was the general counsel of the Young America's Foundation, which many of you may know is a very good nonprofit that works on liberty on college campuses. So Mark has been working away on the East Coast to help us manage all these cases as well. And then, of course, many people at my law firm, the Dhillon Law Group, Gregory Michael, Hui Lee, and a few others. And on top of that, as this war has gone on over the last 2 months, a number of other lawyers have stepped forward to either volunteer their time or join us on what we call a low bono basis. So the Center for American Liberty, as you mentioned, is a nonprofit that I started last year. Over the years, being involved in civic life here in California, I've just, been in the news. And as a result of that, we get a lot of inquiries at my law firm about people who've had their civil rights violated. And, this nonprofit started out to help people who were whose rights were being violated on social media platforms by the government in their workplaces, and particularly if they happen to have an unpopular, i.e. in the Bay Area where I live, politically incorrect viewpoint or conservative viewpoint. These folks are being trampled on in their jobs, online, their contracts are being violated and so forth. So we started it because of that. And so that nonprofit was in place, we're ramping up, and then boom, this COVID crisis happened out of very little notice to us. And I immediately thought, okay, the governor and the president are saying we need to flatten the curve. We don't want to overwhelm our hospitals. Certainly, I don't want to die, gasping for breath, and neither do I want my husband or any member of my family. So I think everybody accepted that at face value. And I think, frankly, I gave the governor, and probably some others here gave the governor good marks, because he was getting along with our leadership in Washington, the scientists there and so forth. But what we've seen in California, and what we see actually throughout history, dating back to the beginning of recorded history, is that absolute power corrupts. And it corrupts absolutely. And that's what's happening here in California. It's already sort of a situation where there isn't a lot of checks and balances in our government. And the governor, to do all of these things that we're going to talk about here, he invoked the Emergency Services Act in California. And you may have heard about, some of the healthcare laws that allow people to be quarantined and so forth. But there's also these emergency powers. Now, let me give a little bit of a historical perspective. So we're going to talk about United States Supreme Court cases a little bit. I don't want to get too boring, but I think for those of you who are interested, you might want to know where some of these crazy laws that judges are applying today, where does that come from? Okay, so we have a system of checks and balances in our government. But however, the federal courts are typically there to step in when a state government, including state governor, legislature, even state court judges, violate your civil rights. So that's a place that a lot of lawyers are going in to protect our civil rights in this situation. But this is not the first emergency or even the first health emergency that our federal courts have dealt with. So about turn of the 20th century, I should say, early 1900s, there was a smallpox outbreak in our country. And the smallpox outbreak was way deadlier than what we're talking about here in COVID, even more than what COVID was projected to be at the beginning. And there was a man named Jacobson who did not want to be vaccinated. He believed that it would infringe on his personal autonomy. And he was fined by the government for refusing to vaccinate. He wasn't forcibly vaccinated or anything like that. He was fined. He challenged the state's authority to vaccinate him up to the United States Supreme Court. And the United States Supreme Court said that under emergency powers that are kind of an inherent power of the state had the right to demand that everybody be vaccinated because a highly communicable and deadly disease like smallpox could affect not just him, but affect other people if he were a carrier. And so that was the ruling. And out of that one ruling regarding smallpox 120 years ago, in a different era of science and a different era of density of populations and technology, that is the law on which a lot of our bad laws today that you are all suffering under are being made. Now, since that time, United States Supreme Court has applied a lot of our Bill of Rights to the states. So, for example, the First Amendment, which we all enjoy to speak, protest, congregate, assemble, worship, and of course, freedom of the press, that has been incorporated into all of the states. So California has to follow the First Amendment. California also has its own constitution, and that constitution provides certain rights. Now, as a result of that incorporation, there's also a body of law that has grown up in California statutory law. So I want to say it's the 1960s that California passed this Emergency Services Act. And that was not meant for this crisis or any other crisis. It was a general law meant to say that in some awful catastrophe. Now, remember in the 1960s, there have been a bunch of wars over the past generation. They wanted to make sure that the governor, in the event of some horrible catastrophe, had the power to go in and run the government, keep everybody safe, without a lot of paperwork and without a lot of, having to call in the legislature. And we all know what a bummer that can be when, two parties are fighting. Of course, that's no longer a problem in Sacramento, but I digress. But so this law, it's really misunderstood. Just today, I had a hearing today on one of the beach cases, and the governors, represented by the attorney general, came in and they basically said to the judge, oh, of course, the governor can do whatever he wants. We have this emergency services statute and he can do whatever he wants. Well, it doesn't really say that. And in fact, when you go back and look at it, it's actually meant to limit and circumscribe the rights of the governor acting as the sole arm of the government that's operating to do whatever he wants. There's some time limits in it. There's a 60-day declaration of emergency period. There are even some narrower time limits in there. And most importantly, the law says the governor may only enjoy these emergency powers, which includes suspending certain regulations, suspending enforcement of certain laws, some other vague things he can do, commandeer property and so forth. He can only do that for so long as the duration of the emergency. And as soon as that emergency is over, he must, as reasonably, as quickly as practically, return to the status quo so that we can run back to our democratic system of government. Well, I would argue, and I think many people would argue today, that from a time when at the beginning of this crisis 2 months ago, the governor said, basically, everybody's going to die. It's a horrible situation. The hospitals are going to be overwhelmed. President Trump, please send a ship. We got to keep people, we're not going to be able to, have enough ventilators. It was a crisis. And to be fair, other governors were doing the same thing, particularly governors in more popular states. They were very worried. It quickly became clear that the models on which this entire emergency and panic, frankly, was predicated, they were wrong. They're wrong by a factor of magnitude. Okay, order of magnitude. There are not 25 million people infected in California. There probably may not ever be, or maybe they will be, but not at the same time. There's no shortage of beds, no shortage of ventilators, no shortage of masks, no shortage of anything except for shortage of jobs right now in California. So we're going to get to that in a minute. But what the governor has done, and not the only governor, I would say some red state governors, some blue state governors, other governors have done, is take the emergency powers, and really he loves it. And so there's no checks and balances. The governor asked the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to take control of the courts. She immediately suspended and closed all the courts. There's no right to speedy trial in California right now. Criminals are being let out of jail. There's no bail requirement in California, and a number of things are being done in the name of this emergency that, frankly, no longer exists as an emergency. Is it a health crisis? Yes. Should we be taking precautions? Absolutely, and my family is taking them. Should we be acting like this is worse than the Civil War, where even in the United States Civil War, the writ of habeas corpus was only temporarily suspended by President Lincoln. So in our history of the United States, we have never had a situation, not in the World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, not in any fire, not in any hurricane, not in any threatened tsunami. We have never had a situation where so many of our civil rights have been suspended, and we are not done yet. So speaking on behalf of my team, I and my fellow lawyers on this team began to get deluged with inquiries, and I will call them inquiries. They're coming in waves. So the first wave of inquiries is from the people of faith. I'm a person of faith. I'm a member of the Sikh faith, and most of the people who work at my firm, they're members of different faiths. We began getting inquiries from people of faith saying, the governor is suspending our right under his order that was in the middle of March, his order that says who is an essential personnel and who isn't. That order says that essential personnel include up to 10 officials, if you will, in a church who can go into the church for purposes of putting on a streaming service or other form of technologically assisted religious worship. And it specifically calls out churches. And we are all familiar by now with the list of essential services and non-essential services. A few things are essential and most things are not. So for example, the governor initially did not have marijuana shops as part of his essential services. Got a phone call, a little bit of lobbying from the marijuana industry, and boom, those guys are on the essential services list. Most of the governor's list of essential services are taken in broad categories from the essential services infrastructure list. I forget the exact acronym from DC that has to do with natural disasters. It's generic. It doesn't target religion. That's an add-on from California, by the way. Okay. So this is problematic, obviously. Many of us like to go to our temple, our church, our synagogue, our mosque every Sunday, or sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, or when we feel like it. We don't get permission from the government. Well, this has become problematic, and many of the pastors who wanted to hold services in Southern California, particularly, they were being ticketed. They were being threatened, even if they wanted to do it safely with social distancing and masks, drive-in services. So that's the first lawsuit that our team at the Center for American Liberty filed in regard to these civil rights crises. We filed on behalf of 3 pastors and 1 parishioner in Southern California in a case called Gish, named after Wendy Gish, against Newsom, the governor, and the attorney general, and the boards of supervisors of the 3 counties involved, the 2 counties, sorry. We went to court, we sought an injunction, and the judge denied the injunction. We sought a temporary restraining order in order to be able to worship. But what was interesting is after we filed the lawsuit and we filed for the injunction, the governor came back in his reply brief filed by the attorney general, and he said, well, of course, drive-in services are permitted. They're a form of technology. And so it's okay to have drive-in services. Now, you may be looking at each other if you're watching this together and saying, you know, in what universe is drive-in services like Zoom or like Skype or like what we're doing here today? The answer is it isn't. That was just made up on the fly. But what I'm going to give you is an example of the governor changing the rules as the game progresses and as he gets challenged in court. So as a result of our lawsuit, drive-in services are supposed to be permitted throughout California. However, many counties have not changed their rules and are not allowing it. So we're going to have to go in individually, write letters, threaten these counties, and make them open it up. We are also parties to 2 other cases involving these issues. Bill Becker at the Freedom X Law Foundation in Los Angeles County also filed, also as part of a lawsuit, and we're part of that lawsuit with him, also representing a Christian congregation seeking to be able to worship. They are now taking advantage of the drive-in services, but they would like to be able to worship more closely together. And this week, together with some very fine lawyers there in San Diego County, Freedom of Conscience Defense Fund with Chuck Lamandry and Paul Jonah, who many of you may know, they also filed a lawsuit in conjunction with our team regarding the rights of a interfaith coalition of different religious leaders, also seeking the right to worship. So what is interesting about the religion category, and I am going to move off of religion, is that the same type of situation has happened in some other states. So in Kentucky, Kansas also, we've seen major crackdown on churches, sheriffs being ordered to go arrest people or give tickets to people who dare attend a church service, even if they are practicing safe distancing. Well, in those states, lawyers like me went into federal court and boom, they got their injunction. Under the same legal regime, the same United States Supreme Court cases, the court said, no, even in an emergency, the Constitution still applies. We're not going to throw the Constitution out the door. The governor can't do whatever he wants. And where, as here, by the way, as here in California, the government makes a rule that disproportionately impacts religion, that's unconstitutional unless the government can show that the rule is necessary and is subject to strict scrutiny, that it is absolutely necessary to achieve a compelling government interest. I would say a month ago, was there a compelling government interest in keeping people apart and wearing masks and all of that? Yes. But is the rule that bans all church services reasonably tailored to that? The answer is no. Is it even rationally related to it? The answer is no, in my opinion. And I argue to the court that if you can go to a Costco or a Walmart or your local grocery store, or if you are so inclined to the marijuana shop, get your Maui Wowie, you can stay there as long as you want. There's no limitation on that. You can meet your friends there if you want. You want to be creative and say, let's all meet in aisle 6 and have a conversation, hang out. You can really do that, but you can't do that in a church. You can't even have an outdoor service in a church, only in your car. This is irrational. It really bears no relation. It's simply the governor who has a certain view of religion, in my opinion, thinking, well, some people only go to church once a year. What's the big deal? You know, they can go to, by the time Christmas rolls around, they can go to, midnight mass or what have you. That's not the way many of us experience religion. Many of us who are traditional, we want to see one another. Praying together in fellowship is very important to many faiths, not just the Christian faith. Many faiths have that. My faith has that. It's very debilitating for people who are older, people who are count on that social connection, and people who really gain spiritual solace from that togetherness. We've had church-based Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous groups disbanded effectively, which is, of course, devastating to people with those substance abuse issues. So there are so many different consequences to this. And of course, now churches and dioceses are beginning to declare bankruptcy around the country because of these shutdown orders. And so it is absolutely crippling. Governor won't listen. We are teeing up our case, Gish case, up to the Ninth Circuit, where we may have some better judges in terms of better inclined to believe our positions and our viewpoints on the legal framework, not an emotional appeal, but the law, in my opinion, does not apply here. So, Tony, should I be taking a break and letting some questions be asked?
I think that's great. We should, get a glass of water there, have a little Marco Rubio moment, and grab some water.
Pellegrino, and I'm happy to answer questions about religion. I'm also going to cover the right to protest, also very important. Also, a number of other rights, right to equal protection, due process, your right to open your business. I'm sure some people have questions about masks and the coming tracking and the coming surveillance regime that is being threatened.
Exactly. These are all the questions that I'm getting in the chat window. And so to that end, one question, I'm going to put up first of all another poll here. I want to say, we're going to see how people feel about their rights. And you mentioned it a little bit, how in the beginning we're all pulling together. Hey, we don't know. This is something unknown. We've never seen it before. What if this is going to wipe out the entire population, the entire world? Let's all just settle down for a bit and hunker down. But times are different now. So how do you feel about the infringement of your rights during this coronavirus situation? I'm going to send this out to everybody. I want to see where people are at. And Harmeet, and for everybody else's benefit, if they're not seeing it on their phone or so, the first question is, I don't like it, or first answer, I don't like it, but I feel it's still required to beat COVID-19. The second is, I was okay initially, but now it's time to restore our rights. The third option, it was never okay. There's no asterisk on the Bill of Rights. And the fourth option is really, I'm not sure yet. That's partly why I'm here to learn. And so we'll let that kind of pulse through a little bit. So while we're getting those responses in, maybe one of the frustrations that people have expressed to me and myself is the left seems to be able to walk in and things stop on a dime, these injunctions and so forth. And here we are, and I know you filed some of these weeks ago, and they just kind of continue on. And do they just, why don't we ever have, it seems like there's never an injunction in favor of liberty. There are always injunctions stopping the president and everything else. And I know you mentioned the one injunction that got turned down. Does it come back up again? I mean, talk to us a little bit about that. Why? How come our injunctions never advance freedom?
I'll tell you, there have been some hard days around here in our home. I'm working really hard, but I have piled up a string of losses that has never occurred in my entire career before. We are all about winning, and we're, work really hard, and we have a good team, and we don't tend to advance theories that don't win. These theories in these cases should win, okay? If they were in a different state, they would win. But I can give you examples of that. And even in state courts in Michigan and some other places, and Illinois rather, some state court judges are saying, no, the governor has gone too far. He does not have the right to do this, that, or the other, but we're not hitting it yet. But I'm not giving up yet. Have filed 10 different lawsuits over 10 different issues, and we're going to be filing another one tomorrow. And it will probably not be the last one tomorrow either. We're, having to sort of go to different places, bring different theories, invoke different regimes.
Let me give you the results here. 2%, I don't like it, but I feel it's still required. So that's 2%. 41%, I was okay initially, but now it's time to restore them. 41%, and then it was never okay. There's no asterisk on Bill of Rights. 53%, and then a couple of are not sure yet, and so forth. But clearly, people are leaning out of this crisis, haven't given the benefit of the doubt. So talk to us about some of the other ones. You mentioned a few others that we talk about.
Sure.
The math, being able to work. I mean, these are all questions that are coming through.
Yeah.
And so, please address those that we're all struggling with. And at some point, we all heard about the lady in Texas who said, I have kids to feed and I'm going to work. And a judge put her in jail and she's out now. But that's what it seems to me. You talk about Governor Newsom having a relationship to religion. I think he also has a relationship, doesn't understand regular people out there. Not everybody works at a government job where you're continuing to get paid or some kind of recurring revenue. Most Californians, just like most Americans, struggle and work even in the best of times, having financial difficulties and so forth. So to have this,
absolutely,
just sit home and write your third novel. What's the problem?
Well, even those of us who have white collar jobs. I mean, I'm a partner at my own law firm, and I have 10 people who work for me, and everybody is working from home. Many law firms in America have cut salaries by 50%. Partners aren't taking home money, and people are being laid off. So even in the six-figure professions, people are losing their jobs. I'd say in San Francisco, the people who are kind of happy about the status quo are people in maybe the lowest wage jobs, where right now they're actually making more money than they were before. Even some of those people, if they're being honest, don't really love it. They like to work, but many people don't. But that money is going to run out. The welfare is going to run out, and the government doesn't have any more money to print, and we are going to be hitting an economic crisis. And by the way, we're already hitting a mental health crisis. Suicides are up, suicide hotlines are jammed, domestic violence is up, child abuse is up, and the courts are closed. You can't even go anywhere for justice. This is epic catastrophe on many fronts. And what do you do when there's an epic catastrophe and your government is oppressing you? Why? You go to the streets to protest, except the governor has made protest a criminal act. And so I have two clients. Some of you may know Ron Gibbons. He's part of a operation that is, one of the prominent gun stores in Sacramento. And he wanted to protest the fact that the government was taking longer to process background checks for purchases and for employees. He wanted to protest. He went. He did all the right things. He went and got a permit, pulled a permit, and he said in the permit, we're going to do social distancing, we're going to stand apart, and we're going to wear masks. So that was part of his permit. Denied. And it was denied because the governor saw a protest. Some people were going through the right means. They went and got a permit rather. They protested. The governor didn't like to see it, didn't like what he saw. People were too close together for his non-scientific eye. And he banned all protest. Another client, a candidate for Congress, and she wanted to, protest the governor's policies. Same thing. She was denied the protest permit. An ally of mine who actually argued that case was a liberal lawyer. Okay, I'm pretty known to be conservative in my values, but there are the old-fashioned ACLU type lawyers who still believe that the right to protest exists, even for people whose views they don't agree with. I think he made some very compelling arguments, and the judge in Sacramento, who is a Bush appointee, he seemed to understand both sides. I think he was pretty torn up. He invited us to go appeal the case immediately. So we're preparing to go appeal that. Yes, the right to protest was denied. And by the way, which is interesting is a coalition of liberal scholars wrote to the governor in an open letter. This includes Larry Tribe from Harvard. It includes Floyd Abrams, the very famous First Amendment lawyer. And they were on our side, not citing our case, but they said, Governor, you've gone too far. You can't ban protest altogether. Maybe you can limit the number of people, the duration of the protest. You can require that they stand far apart. You can do the social distancing X's like we do in the grocery store. No, nothing inflexible, no protest for you. Okay, that's the current regime here in California. So all of you who've gone out to protest, you're criminals in the eyes of the state of California. That is unfortunate, and really we do need the Ninth Circuit to step in. The DOJ is also missing in action right now. Unfortunately, it would really be helpful if they would come in and file an injunction with us or stand next to us in one of these many cases. So other cases that we've had have included economic cases. We filed a case on behalf of business owners in Southern California who have not been able to open their restaurants and their other businesses, and all of them are willing to do the social distancing. Now, you may agree or disagree with the social distancing. I understand the politics behind that. But let me just tell you as a lawyer, when you're going into court, trying to make an argument and you're telling a judge where, the judge is seeing pandemic, people dying on the streets, et cetera, that's what he sees in the media. And you're saying, hey, judge, I want you to ignore that. And I want you to give me my rights back. You kind of have to strike a balance. So we're trying to go in and say, we are prepared to do the CDC guidelines that the president and his advisors are suggesting. We still aren't getting any of these rights allowed to us. And on top of that, the governor is suspending property rights. So you'll probably see a lawsuit coming up on the rights of property owners who are not only not allowed to evict people during a 60-day period of the initial emergency, which is about to expire, by the way, next week, but also the Supreme Court justice has suspended the courts. And so once the courts open, some counties have said you can't even file an eviction proceeding for another 90 days after that. That's happening in Santa Clara County. So that's probably going to be another case. So property rights are being suspended. I think the most compelling thing happening right now is the rights of people who patiently waited through these so-called phases. We were told 2 weeks to flatten the curve. In San Francisco, it was 3 weeks of shutdown. Everybody went home and did their thing, and then they come back, and guess what? We are being gaslighted. The goalposts keep moving and the rules keep changing on a daily basis. So to give one example of that, the notorious case of last week, the governor of California seeing a fake news photograph from a foot level in the sand in Southern California. He did not like to see people, families out on the beach in Newport Beach and Huntington Beach. And he banned everybody in Orange County from going to the beach. Now, there are various discussions about his motivation for that. I'm not going to get into his motivations. What I will say is he did treat Orange County differently than all of the other counties in California. So people in San Diego County with some locally imposed limitations are allowed to go to the beach. People in Ventura County with some locally imposed limitations allowed to go to the beach. LA County said, we're not going to allow it. But there was only one county in California where the local leaders said, we want our rules in effect. We're going to have the same rules, no alcohol, people doing social distancing and all of that, keep moving. That was not good enough for the governor. So we had our second hearing on the second case earlier today, and the judge has taken it under advisement. But basically what the governor is doing is he's outracing all of these legal challenges. Sue him, and he quickly changes the rules. So in Orange County, he got the cities in the county to change their rules. And then he went into court. The attorney general went into court today and said, hey, look, we settled this case already. Everybody can go to the beach. Well, you can go to the beach if you live near the beach, but a lot of the parking is shut. You can't go to the beach if you are disabled. You can't go to the beach if you're a mother nursing her child, because you can only go to the beach if you are moving, not if you are stationary, not if you are sitting. You may not sit on the beach. And by the way, you can sit on the beach in other counties. You can't sit on so this is ridiculous. The governor just keeps changing the rules. He makes it up on the fly. He does not have the authority to do this. We've argued this to the court. The city of Huntington Beach also argued it to the court. So far, the court has not agreed with us. Fingers crossed, we will see what happens. But to me, and to many people who study psychology and help people who have suffered in abusive situations, it's abusive to keep changing the rules. Felt very unfair when I was a kid, and my mom might change the rules on me. It feels pretty unfair for the governor to say 3.2 million of you in California, taxpayers, adults, grown people who are doing pretty well, taking care of yourselves, you have a timeout until I decide otherwise. So this is just simply not how we work in this country, and it should not be how it works. Now, moving ahead to some of the things that are coming up. So Nail salons, hair salons. I mean, I heard from many people. I think there's some friends of mine on this webinar who have gone and gotten the what I call a black market haircut, or as one of my friends said yesterday, a freedom cut. Okay, that's nice that you were able to do that. Guys, is really only guys who are doing this that I know, but it's illegal. You know, you're a criminal, and these hair salons people are criminals because it's not in the governor's little rules of what's essential and not essential. So it's not essential for you to get a haircut or your nails done. Okay, I get that. But what about the people who feed their families by doing that? There's a human right to work. There's a civil right to work. There's a right to travel, which is inherent in our right to work. That's part of our constitutional framework. And people who have licenses have property interests in those licenses. And when the government takes away your property interest, you are entitled to due process. You are also entitled to the government treating you equally, that's called equal protection, as other people who are similarly situated. But what happened in real life? Big corporate entities with good lobbyists and fact checks given to politicians, they got exemptions from these rules. So Amazon, you can buy I can buy my knitting needles from Amazon. I can't buy them from the lady down the street who sells them and who makes her living doing that. I can buy any book, I can buy any of that stuff, but it has killed downtown retail. It is even killing big retail. Nordstrom's shops are shutting permanently, many of them, JCPenney's in bankruptcy. So it's been devastating. So we represent the 500,000 plus cosmetologists and barbers and hair salon owners in California, and we'll be filing a lawsuit shortly, within the next few hours actually, on this matter, going to court to seek their right to equal protection, due process, their property rights, and their rights to have their freedoms not taken away arbitrarily by the government. And that's what's happened here. Anybody who has a license to do any of those things in California, they have done 350 hours a minimum to be able to do nails and get that license in California. You have 350 hours of training, all the way up to the people who color ladies' hair, 1,600 hours. And here are some of the tragic consequences. I think anybody here on this webinar who has protested against these restrictions, somebody you know, either on Facebook or in your real life, has said to you, oh, you want grandma to die for your haircut, or you want grandma to die for your blonde roots, being recolored. No, I don't want grandma to die, but there's kind of a middle ground in there. But let me tell you how grandma might die. Now, the hair stylists in California are trained in their exams to spot medical conditions. They're trained to spot open sores. They're trained to spot cancerous lesions. And I heard earlier this week from a oncologist who said that one of his patients who had not been able to go regularly to the hair salon, but now is feeling something, she was told by her cosmetologist, her hairstylist 2 months ago, right before the shutdown, hey, you have something on your head, you should really have that looked at. And the patient was supposed to go to the dermatologist to get that checked out. Well, guess what? The governor decreed that dermatology is frivolous. Dermatologists cannot operate. Okay, so for the last 2 months, dermatologist. So anyway, by now this lady has a melanoma on her head. She has a major skin cancer condition on her head, which had there not been a shutdown, and by the way, had the hairstylist not been able to identify that, she might not even know today. So for the last 2 months, all these people who normally see their stylist, who knows all their secrets, there are other cancers that are being undetected as a result of that first line of defense not being allowed to operate. So there is a health and safety risk. Now, let's balance these. There's about, in our state of 40 million people, there are about 2,750 at the last count I saw online, people who have died from what the government says is coronavirus. I don't even trust that, to be frank, because we all know that that's being inflated according to what we've seen in some examples of hospitals being compensated extra. So I don't want to get into conspiracy theories here, but the point is, every death from coronavirus, I know from personal knowledge, is not necessarily death from coronavirus. So what are the number of deaths of people who are going to get cancer and die? What about the additional obesity, diabetes, all the medical conditions that people are not getting treated for? Heart valve replacement, breast reconstructive surgery, which is very important to many women's mental health. That's a health crisis as well. The governor isn't seeing that. The governor is in a little bubble and he's got his advisors. I don't think he's seeing the human misery out there on the streets. And we really need to make him see that. in a way that we don't get arrested. So I'm not encouraging that anybody do anything illegal, but I do think it's important that we all stand up and make our voices heard in some way.
Yes. Yes, thank you. And I'm getting here, we're getting some feedback from folks and so on, and they're now starting to, number one, saying, hey, great job, thank you for fighting. And the second is, what can we do? So let's do the first thing, because I want to at least get the meat of things done in the hour that we respect people's time. But what is obviously there's only one, unfortunately, there's only one Harmeet, but what is the number one thing holding you back? This is, I'm sure it's like drinking water from a fire hose, this stuff coming in. So what is, I'm sure financial support is part of that. And actually to that end, while you're answering that, I'm going to put up a poll. This is not a binding poll, everybody. So don't, but if I'm going to put a poll up just to see where people stand, or if you're in a position to help financially, because obviously we know that the left is very, very well funded, and that's why we see lawsuits everywhere. And somehow when it comes to our team, it's always you're a scrappy warrior. If people think that this is somehow you're making it by doing this, it's quite the opposite. This is really a service from you, and I thank you for that. But nobody's getting rich here, and so what is your bottleneck, or can you talk to what do you need? And in the meantime, I'm going to put up, and then we'll get to, you can talk about how people can help as well. In the meantime, I'm going to put this up, and it's not binding, everybody, but just if you were able to put a financial contribution, what would it be? And I'm going to put that up, and people can answer while you're answering. Sorry.
Yes, and so, well, Tony, thank you for mentioning that. Well, a bottleneck is obviously funding. I haven't made a penny off of this effort. I can tell you that all the lawyers who work with me are working at either substantially below their normal rates by a factor of 50% or less, and that's a condition of working with us, they severely discount their rates, or they're doing it for free. That has happened as well. So Bill Asaley's firm in Orange County has handled with us some of the beach cases and done a lot of that work at a deeply discounted or free rate. So that's very important to know. But the more resources we have, the more work we can do. And it's not just lawsuits, but before you get to lawsuits, it's counseling people. It's telling people, what are my rights in these circumstances? Honestly, my team is like answering phone calls, emails, text messages, literally every waking hour, the phone is ringing off the hook for that. And if we had more warriors next to us who could, sort of just cover their overhead to do this, we need that to be able to do this. And this crisis will not be the only crisis. One reason I'm fighting so hard now is we have seen this is like a test. And this is not only a test. If this works, which it is working, by the way, for the governor to take over all this power and give us zero rights and suspend the Constitution, it'll happen next year. He's already suspended the way we run our elections in the fall. It'll happen forever. And that is a real crisis for us. So we need to fight this now and be prepared to fight it. To your point, Tony, the left has an army. ACLU has, hundreds of lawyers on retainer outside, and hundreds or even maybe over 1,000 staff attorneys in the country. They go into court at the drop of a hat. Now, these courts are deferring to the governor's emergency powers. These same courts do not defer to the president's emergency powers. So there's a different double standard, and it's going to take an army of lawyers years to fight these cases through the courts to get our rights back. But the courts, by the way, have been where our most fundamental civil rights have been established in this country historically. And so while it may seem discouraging, why should we go to court? Let's just go get our nails done and that's fine. It doesn't really work that way. Believe me, the governor has a lot of data on everybody. The governor has threatened through the cosmetology, the licensing boards, to pull the licenses of all those people. So now for the crime of trying to put food on their families' tables, they could lose their licenses, which is their only way of making a living permanently in California. That's kind of the career death penalty. Same thing is happening to restaurants. I've heard from restaurants all over the state of California, gyms, Airbnbs, while some, of course, you ask, probably Lorena Gonzalez thinks that it's only rich people who own property. Many retired people are people who are looking to retire, people who are not looking to retire, but this is their livelihood, is providing housing for others and getting paid for that. It's a business. So we do have a crisis, and without support to the Center for American Liberty, I won't be able to do it. And so I would encourage folks to try to donate if they can. And we have a a text to donate option as well over there. I think that Tony can show that on the screen. That's really important. The more funds we have at a nonprofit basis, the more lawyers we can hire. And as Tony mentioned, I have a day job. It's being a lawyer. I fight against some of the biggest corporations in the country and I win. And, you know, that's great. But this is a labor of love for me. That's why I started it. And there are a lot of other lawyers who want to do it. Maybe they can't afford to do it like I can. And so for them, it's really important to have some funds. And by the way, we're doing this in California. That's where all of our lawsuits to date have been filed. We will be filing some stuff in other states, and we're raising money out of state for that type of effort as well. There are other places that are hurting as well. But in California, the types of calls I'm getting, just so that you know, include recently, because now there's this mask requirement. People have been asking me about the masks. What's the deal with the mask? Do I have to wear a mask? Why can't I not wear a mask? So the first thing I tell them is, as a business owner, this is a liability issue for the businesses. So if you're fortunate enough to be on the governor's favored list of people who are able to run your business, and you'd like to be able to keep doing that, the governor's done a couple of tricky things right now that are going to make it more difficult for businesses to operate. One is he's shifting the presumption of, if any of your workers get COVID within 14 days of returning to work, that's going to be a workers' compensation issue on you. Now, anybody here who runs a business knows that's going to make the workers' compensation premium skyrocket. And so if you're a business owner, you're asking people to wear masks to prevent your workers from getting sick and suing you. So that's really to protect the business owners. It's like, consider it like shirt and shoes. Is it unconstitutional to make you wear a shirt and shoes in the store? It isn't. It's a hygiene measure. So think of it that way. Now, it's a different question whether the government can make you wear a mask outdoors. What's been really confusing about this whole situation is that top medical scientists and advisors and doctors have had different views on that. There's a lot of science saying there is no scientific basis. There's a lot of science saying that making somebody wear a mask for 8 hours, particularly if they're in an indoor setting, can be very detrimental. It can be, you know, carbon monoxide, can be fumes if you're in a place that has some fumes or indoors. So I think that there's going to need to be some litigation probably on that issue as well. And, you know, it depends on enforcement. What we are seeing in California, some good news for you, is there are increasing numbers of law enforcement, including sheriffs I've spoken to of some of the counties in California, not yours, unfortunately, in San Diego, Tony, but some of the sheriffs have said they're not going to enforce unconstitutional orders. Now, interesting tidbit for you. We used to have a law here in California based on the Klan Act, Federal Klan Act, which was to prevent people from wearing the masks and hoods to intimidate people. Well, the ACLU struck that law down. So in other words, the law that said you can't wear a mask was struck down because that was supposed to be expressive speech. So to me, as a civil rights lawyer, I'm wondering, if the government can't prevent me from wearing a mask, and that's a civil right, how can the government make me wear a mask? Okay, so we have not litigated that issue yet, but that issue is coming for litigation. And particularly, I think the science is beginning to build up on our side there. And then finally, I'm going to point to the issue, and hopefully there's some information there on the screen about how to support us, contact tracing. This is the next nightmare that's coming. So historically, back in the day, way before we had devices that tracked all of our movements, we had the AIDS crisis. And the AIDS crisis was a disease that was sexually transmitted. And so, you know, it was pretty easy to figure out for some people, how many people did you sleep with and who could you have gotten this disease from? And then through an interview process, doctors were able to maybe go and pinpoint, inform people they may have been infected, get blood tested. This is very different. This is a form of the flu, highly communicable. Contact tracing might have worked at the beginning of this process, might not have worked. I think the science is coming down on the concept. If you really ask people who know about epidemiology, it's pointless at this point to do contact tracing. People are riding the subway in San Francisco, or, you know, going to Costco. Nobody is doing contact tracing of who's in the Costco or any of these other places. By the way, some states are trying to make you write down and make churches write down if you go to a church, as if all the diseases are coming from churches, but they're not coming from Costco or Safeway or these other places. So it's illogical. And I can guarantee you that there will be litigation over the contact tracing issue. Even worse is the big tech companies that are using their apps and Bluetooth technology. So once you get your test done, everybody's being encouraged to get a test. I'm a little leery of that. Until I'm forced to get a test, I'm probably not going to do it, because I'm not trusting what the government of California is going to do with that information. What if I test positive? Am I going to be separated from my husband? Vice versa. This is very concerning to many of us. So do you want your phone to buzz or vibrate when you pass somebody who has had coronavirus. Does that even have any significance? Even the mandatory testing is another issue, because if you're tested today, you could go to the grocery store, which is a essential activity, and you can get it tomorrow. Then what? Is it going to be a regime of us being tested every day, every week? You might also wonder who's paying for the tests. Are big tech companies benefiting from that? These are some questions that are going to be covered in the next waves of litigation that are happening here in California. But all I can tell you is the questions are endless. The concerns are endless, and rightfully so. I think that we don't have any end date to this crisis. The governor is imposing very strict requirements on those counties that are allowed to open up. Being allowed to open, they have to have, I think, no new deaths for 14 days. I mean, you know, the way they're making things up in terms of the numbers, I think that's really difficult to manage. Here in Sonoma County, where I'm sitting right now, 500,000 population, there have been 3 deaths. I think 2 of those were in nursing homes. So it's kind of silly that I have to wear a mask to go outside in a rural community here to go to the grocery store, which is also not full. But those are the rules. One size fits all. Until I think politicians, members of the assembly and legislature stand up on both parties, but either party, frankly, any party, and say, hey, governor, I think you're going too far. Our role as a legislature is to pass the laws. It's not your job to suspend the laws, to make up new laws, to say these laws they don't count anymore and the civil rights don't count. So we're going to need that help from our separation of powers and branches. We're not there yet. The courts aren't willing to help us in California yet, although we're going to keep pushing on that front. The legislature is missing in action. Really kind of sad, really low point of democracy here. But
they have thank you. They're back in session now. I don't know if I should be afraid that they're back in session now, or I should be pleased, because maybe they'll say, hey, we're in session now. Let's pass some of these. Let's vote on some of these things versus doing it by fiat. They should feel that they're being circumvented as well. And we're getting some questions, and I put up the contribution link, and I know some people already made a contribution. I see that in the chat window. Thank you for doing that. And I also put up the link to sign up for your newsletter and your website. So 2 things. What can people do? They're sitting at home. They may or may not be in a position to make a financial contribution. What can they do? I know that I saw something on your website about tips, volunteering if you're an attorney in some ways.
Yeah, that's right.
Or asking for help. And then what can somebody do? Is it worth contacting and yelling at our elected officials, saying, we're demanding that you put a stop to this? What are some things that people can do, and what are resources on your website?
Well, these are excellent.
And I'll put up a link to the website.
Excellent question. So yes, if you're a lawyer and you'd like to either volunteer or be part of our network for low bono services, it doesn't have to be free. We like free, but if you're willing to do it for a lower fee, we have a great need of lawyers who are willing to advise people on these religious liberties issues, free speech issues, and other issues. So let me see here. This is, liberties and other issues. And so we could use that help. And we're intaking actually lawyers from all over the country. We're keeping a database of those. There'll be other crises, and even if you're not able to volunteer for this particular one, we'd like to have you in our network. We need lawyers to counsel people on how to avoid breaking the law if that's their interest. I think when you look at it from what does the government respond to, just to be very crass about it, they respond to money. They respond to who contributes to them. And so I think the government and our elected leaders need to feel the pain from people who have supported them. So if you are a business owner, a lot of business owners have supported legislators or the governor, it's time to speak out. And by the way, I am hearing people on both sides of the political aisle saying they're fed up. They're business owners, property owners. They don't like what their government is doing. Well, it is time to make that known. And if you're in a position to do that, make sure you contact your legislator and say, I supported you before, but unless you start supporting the citizens' rights, I think I'm going to lose your number. I think that's really important that people who do that can do that. In terms of protest, I know people are very uncomfortable with the masks and so forth, but I would say to you, if there is a mob scene looking protest out there that looks like people are completely unconcerned about the transmission of a disease, whatever it is not really helpful. It does not advance the cause. So if you're going to go out there and protest, do it in a way that is safe, maybe a convoy of cars. That seems to be a way that, some people have said, even the government seems to be not too concerned about people in cars. Some organized ways of doing it that are not destructive to life or limb. And at some point, maybe there needs to be a mass day of civil disobedience or something that's organized and done properly and safely. and putting pressure on the governor politically, putting pressure on the governor and starting to get the press maybe to ask questions. We have a few members of the press on our side that maybe began to ask some questions to the governor as well. And, be strong, communicate with your loved ones and with each other, and, be citizen activists, unfortunately, from your home for now. But go out and get some exercise and some fresh air, do it safely, don't accept these lockdown conditions. And I do think the lawsuits are working, by the way. There will be some
that's what I wanted to do. We're getting,
but I think they are.
If you can just give us, and we're coming up on the 7 o'clock here, and so I'm going to throw up a question, and we've gathered some great data, but give us some of the good news. I mean, these are serious things we're dealing with. We're all frustrated. I think everybody on this call wants more and faster and quicker and so on. Can you tell us, and obviously we have some states where you're in a different circuit, for judges and so on. And eventually, I assume these things bubble up to the Supreme Court and these. I don't know, but give us some hope at the end of the tunnel, because this, of course, cannot stand. I mean, we're all sitting around, and the worst part that the governor is doing is he's not putting any end date on this. Well, indefinitely, and that's the worst part. I mean, so people start imagining, well, I might be sitting here, in my backyard for a full year, and of course, that's not acceptable. So give us some good news, and I'll put up a poll for everybody just to let us know how this program and webinar worked, and then Harmeet will be in touch. I will share the information. You'll start getting her information too. But give us some good news just to kind of close us out. There is hope out there. For starters, you're there fighting. So thank you from me and everybody else on the call. Thank you, Harmeet, for doing this. I know this is a huge sacrifice, and I know you have a big team. And thank you, Mark Moiser. Thank you to your executive director. Everybody, you can give some other kudos, but thank you. You have a great team.
Thank you to my husband, Sar, because I can tell you for 18-hour days, I haven't been able to pay much attention to him. It's been around the clock, this, that, or the other, and nonstop, starting at 6 a.m. all the way to midnight and beyond. Last night, I was editing a brief at 2 a.m. that I'm going to file in court later today or tomorrow morning. So the point is, every time we file a lawsuit and we get press attention, the governor changes his position in some way. Because I don't think he wants to go down in history as the judge who had to be reined in by the courts. So he kind of just like he's creeping this way, we're creeping him this way. So church services and drive-in services are now allowed as a result of our lawsuit. I think he's going to end up quietly changing the protest rules as a result of what we did. And he's going to end up allowing that much earlier. Only 2 weeks ago, he was saying nail salons and hair salons, forget about it. Maybe the fall, maybe next year. All of a sudden, after we announced that we're filing a lawsuit on behalf of 500,000 people, who, by the way, some of them are probably his former supporters. Now I think he's talking about maybe opening them up earlier. I don't think he's figured that out. It's all rulemaking on the fly. So I think this is putting pressure. I think we're going to see some lawsuits coming for licensees. I think you're actually going to start seeing, and I happen to have some knowledge of people, I think you're going to start seeing some counties and some elected officials and some law enforcement begin to sue the state of California, because a lot of these restrictions are plainly unconstitutional. And when we begin to have our elected officials and leaders step up and represent us in court or otherwise, the governor will have to yield. The Lorena Gonzalez's of the world will have to yield. The scaremongers of the world who say, if you want to, get your hair colored, grandma's going to die. The welfare is going to start running out, and people are going to have to start looking around and seeing that we have overreacted to a terrible situation, granted, but we cannot slit our own throats as a society and let our liberties die as a result of this. We have to help each other. This is like an underground situation. You have to call your friends and help them and help your neighbors. So I think it's important to stay positive. I know that's really hard, but for me, I could not go through this crisis and just do nothing. I have a law license. I know how to sue. I'm doing that. If you know how to cook, if you know how to help your neighbors with food kitchens or whatever, do something positive. And that does not mean sitting on social media and just complaining all day long. Do whatever you can in your control that's positive, and we will get through this together. And we will remember the politicians who use this terrible opportunity to take away our rights and try to do it permanently. We must remember, we must hold them accountable. And that includes politicians who you elected and said they would be there for you, and they didn't do anything for you in this crisis. I think it's important to look at that as well.
Thank you, Harmeet. So make whoever your elected officials are, call them, email them, contact them, let them know what is the old expression? If you can't make them see the light, make them feel the heat. And that includes friendly, and we have some great supervisors in San Diego that are pushing. I know people are from everywhere. So if your elected official is pushing forward, doing great thing, give him or her kudos. It's hard to step out there because you're effectively going up against the governor. And as Harmeet mentioned, he has a lot of levers to pull to mess with you. And so for the few that are stepping up, we see elected officials tell them thank you, and for the others, make them feel the heat. So we're going to end on time. Be respectful of everybody, and you'll get a replay of this in 24 hours. And let me know if this was helpful. We might do another one. I don't know if Harmeet, you'd be open to it again some point down the road. Thank you for your leadership, and with that, thanks everybody. Stay strong. God bless America.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. This was great. We had over 450, 60 people there, and there were still 430 up until the end. So really appreciate you guys being here. I turned off my my camera, but my voice is still here. We're still playing with this platform. Let us know if it was good, the polls, and that they worked, and so forth. A little bit of fun, a little bit of interactivity, and keeping us people who love freedom connected. So with that, thank you for being in the fight. The fact that you're on here means you've had enough and you're willing to do something. So if you can make a financial contribution to Harmeet's organization, great. If not, there are plenty of other things that you can do, not the least of which sign up on our website. And with that, thank you. I'm proud to be in the fight with you. God bless. Over and out.
Thank you, Tony.